Hey, everybody. Welcome to a wonderful conversation that we have planned for you today with everybody here all over the map. We were just talking about how wonderfully spread out we are geographically. And it's going to be a wonderful conversation about none other than the great and late Philip K. Dick, who lives and resides within our hearts and in the minds and within the ether, the conscious realm. Today we're talking with Anthony Peake, an author, a researcher into some very interesting topics and details. He's written many books going into some of the rather deepest philosophical things that humans have ever really delved into. It's it's going to be deep, and the consciousness shall be torn into today. We're going to be specifically talking about the life of Philip K. Dick, the man who remembered the future, a wonderful book. But let's get this ball rolling. Anthony Peake, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well. I'm recovering from flu, so I'll probably be coughing and spluttering, but again, everybody else is as well, so don't worry about it. But if I suddenly stop coughing and spluttering, it's not because you've said anything I object to. It is just basically that I've got a cold, but one of those things. But wonderful to be talking to you guys. As I said, it is quite fascinating just how geographically spread we are, and it just shows the wonder of how we all share the same worldviews on many, many ways. And we're all kind of we're all reducing down to finding those people that echo our ideas and the way we see the world. And it's all very exciting. So I'm really delighted to be involved.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And it's an honor to be here with you as well. And we have none other than the great team here. We started calling ourselves, and this might be a part of a series that we're working on called the Rhipidon Society. And we have to the left here, the wonderful Juan Ayala. How are you doing, Juan?
Hello. Thank you for, it's going to be a new show, I guess, right? We're starting off with Anthony right off the bat because I got introduced to PKD a little bit later in my journey of the esoteric, and I'm having a great time learning about all the fascinating ideas. And I think everything falls in line when it needs to, right? So I'm here because I'm fully able to grasp these, really the implications that sometimes they'll go over your head if you're not ready for them. So it's a pleasure to be here. You can find me tjojp.com and One on One Podcast anywhere you get your podcast at. Yeah.
Thank you. And SB Alger. How are you doing,
fine,
sir?
Of course. Doing good. Doing very good. I'm excited to be a part of this new venture. I think I probably really started to focus on Philip K. Dick because of, I'm sure, all of our mutual friends, Miguel Connor. And I went to, I wasn't 100% familiar with you, Anthony. So I went to see okay, let me look. And it looks like I already follow you on Facebook. And so I probably listened to some of your interviews and just didn't remember your name in my head. But and Roman showing me some of the stuff that you've been working on, it's like, oh yeah, this guy is definitely it's in the wheelhouse of what we're interested in, consciousness. I noticed that you touch a lot on near-death experience, and I was there's a book. What was the book that you recommended? Do you remember the title? It's an older one, like 2008, I think.
Godaemon.
But yeah, and so the bicameral mind stuff and the concept of two. This stereo vision, stereo healing, stereo soul, I guess I would call it. That's very fascinating to me. So I'm excited to talk to you today, Anthony.
Excellent. Look forward to it.
And Anthony, you feel to wherever listeners can find you, do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook? Share anything with the listeners so they can find you, and we'll put all the links in the description as well.
Okay, that's good. By the way, just as a very quick, in case we don't get around to mentioning it later, I'll be speaking I spoke last year and I'll be speaking again this year in Indian Wells in California at a thing called Contact in the Desert, which is this amazing event. Have thousands of people turn up and everything else as well. And I was invited to speak there last year. And of course, a lot of people weren't really sure who I was. And it went down extremely well, to the extent I've already been invited back to speak this year. And I will be on the Sunday of the weekend, either on the Sunday or the Monday, I'll be doing an intensive on Philip K. Dick, literally just exclusively on Philip K. Dick for probably 3 hours. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to get one or two people who knew him involved in this as well. For instance, somebody I was regularly in contact with was Tessa Dick, who was his final wife, and was the witness to a lot of his theophanies and these 2374 incidents as well. So I'm hoping I can get her across for that as well. So just to let people know about that as well.
Wow, Contact in the Desert is something I've looked into going to before, and maybe I can find myself there this year.
Oh, it'll be great. We had a fantastic time last year. We linked up with so many people, and I met so many new people that are now friends of mine. You know, it's just extraordinary how you link up with people, and because they're trying subtly to change the angle of Contact in the Desert, making it more scientific, making it more conscious based. And indeed, next week, the last weekend of this month, I'll be doing a live event as well with Richard Dolan and Tracy Garbutt Dolan. You might know Richard Dolan and his research into UFOs. And Russell Targ is going to be involved in it as well. And we're going to be doing that over a long weekend as well. So there's a lot happening at the moment, and there's a lot of synergy. It's developing. It's quite exciting.
Yeah, and it looks like Contact in the Desert this year is May 30th through June 3rd. So, Roman, I know you're going to jump across the Pacific Ocean and be stateside. So that's a serious consideration for you to go meet the man in person here. That'd be awesome. So
that would be great. You know, we could do so. Well, you'd have to probably find a way of getting around if you wanted to interview me, though, because I think it's quite controlled. But I'm sure we can sort something out there as well. It'd be great because there's so many people that travel from all around the world to get there, you know, and it was the most amazing few days. I was there talking to Linda Moulton Howe, having lunch with Linda Moulton Howe, when the news broke about the guy talking about the Tic Tacs and everything else as well, you know, and the whole place just erupted with excitement. And, you know, to be there surrounded by people who are absolute experts in this field was an honor indeed. It was quite extraordinary.
And 2023 was quite a year for a lot of these discoveries or these, you know, uncoverings and these delvings and other excitements into the UFO world. You know, you had the mummifications brought up from Mexico in the desert. And the Tic Tac stuff. And there's a bunch of really interesting things happening with that. So I'm sure there's no slim amount of topics to be covered this year. And I'm sure there's a lot of exciting stuff, but that's all great and dandy. And I'm sure Philip K. Dick would be absolutely just I'm sure he would be so stoked to know that he's continuing on. I would like for us to start this conversation, if you can, to tell us how you came into the world of Philip K. Dick, because you were writing before your kind of your paths crossed with how deep this really went with PKD and you, right? Could you tell us that story?
No, absolutely. I mean, I've been interested in science fiction. I mean, I'm an old codger now, so I've been involved and interested in them since the early 1960s in terms of science fiction. And even as a teenager, even pre-teenager, I was reading a good deal of science fiction, as a lot of us do. You know, it's the kind of thing that we're interested in. And I'd read a series of books by Philip K. Dick, but I didn't really get them. I found his science fiction slightly off kilter from what I was normally used to, which was kind of the space opera stuff and the aliens and going to Mars and doing all these exciting things. Whereas Phil was far more deep in his science, and not necessarily his science, but his philosophy. So I didn't really think a great deal about it. So occasionally I'd read a book here, there, and everywhere. But what I was doing was I'd written my first book, and I was doing an event in Bolton in the northwest of England. And I was doing this event, and it was in a kind of a theatre type setup in a library. It was quite an amazing theatre at the back of Bolton Library. And as I'm doing my talk, I'm coming towards the end of it, and there's a group of people in the far corner of the theatre. And I said a couple of things, and they got really animated. And they were saying, this is ridiculous. Wow, they were chacking away to each other. And I thought, this is pretty ill-mannered. Why are they doing this? So when I finished the lecture, they came down excitedly and they said, what you were doing here is extraordinary. And they said, we only have found, like you, they said, we only found out about you by sheer chance. So many people come across my work by absolutely what I call synchronidity. It's a mixture of synchronicity and serendipity that these things happen. And we might touch upon some of these things because I know Phil was interested in this. But they turned around and they said, the only reason we were here tonight was quite by chance. One of our group came into the library to take some books in and spotted the poster. But we didn't know you were going to be talking about the subjects you were talking about. And they said, like, for instance, the Philip K. Dick stuff you've just been talking about, because I've written about Philip K. Dick in passing. And in my book, Godaemon, I have a section on him, but nothing in great detail. And one of the guys in the group turns around to me and he goes, you know that Philip K. Dick predicted you, don't you? And, it's the kind of thing you go, yeah, of course he did. Yeah, of course he did. And he turned around and he said, do you know there is a novel called Counterclock World that Philip K. Dick wrote? And I said, yes, I'm aware of it. And he said, and in Counterclock World, it's the stuff a lot of the stuff you deal with in your book, The Labyrinth of Time. It's time going backwards and forwards and everything else. And he said, do you know that in that book, there is a character who discovers certain elements of life after death? And he turned around to me and he said, can you imagine of all the names that Philip K. Dick could have chosen to call this person? And I said, yeah, like what did he call him? Anarch Peake. Now, when he told me that, I thought, this is extraordinary. Because one of the things I was very interested in, and I discussed this in my Philip K. Dick book, is Philip K. Dick's concept of orthogonal time. And I know you guys have talked about the concept of orthogonal time and the idea that there is a time that runs at a right angle to this time, which means effectively that the past, present, and future are all concurrent, and that you can have glimpses of the future and glimpses of the past, which I believe Phil did have. Now, I don't know if you remember, but there was a period during Phil's 2374 theophany when he said that all kinds of strange things happened to him, where he had a series of very powerful hypnagogic imagery when he was lying in bed. And he said he saw books flying past and images and everything else as well. And I thought to myself, can you imagine, could it be possible that at that time he could have subliminally seen the cover of this book flashing past him? Now, if he had seen that, because he said the books flash past, he would have literally had a moment's chance to take in what he saw. And he would have seen the name of the author, but he probably just caught the first two letters of the name, A-N, and probably the surname without the E on the end. And then subliminally, this became part of his subconscious. Then when he writes Counterclock World, he suddenly thinks, what am I going to call this character? And he calls him Anarch Peake. Now, that to me was such a stunning piece of information that I realized I had to write a book on Philip K. Dick. But funnily enough, it was my publishers, one of my publishers that suggested that I write a book on Philip K. Dick. They knew I'd written about him, and they said, do you know what we'd like you to do is to literally write a book on Philip K. Dick, which is what I did. And that's the only book that's ever happened where my publishers have said, this is the subject we'd like you to follow up on.
Beautiful. Wow. That's just stunning to think of we've all had that feeling of being rudely interrupted or just something kind of coming over the top of what's happening. And you're like, that's not really kosher. That's not cool. But then having it resolve into something. I've had this, I'll tell you the story some other time. I don't want to digress, but remind me if we get together again, I'll tell you guys a crazy story about picking a man up by his head in church. So, but that's what I made.
That sounds very. Hope it wasn't in the crypt, because it would be cryptic if it was. Yeah. Sorry, I make puns.
No, that's amazing. No, we're all about it. And
well, because one of the things, again, because it's so important, I mention it here before I forget, so we don't run out of time, is that Philip K. Dick predicted his own death. and you probably know this from the book.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to talk about this now, or do you want to build up into that?
Let's lay it all down. We got lots of ground to cover, so I'm with it. Any direction we go.
As far as I know, I'm the only writer that's discussed this. And funnily enough, I featured in a German and French television production on the lives of Philip K. Dick, which went out around about 4 or 5 years ago, and I filmed it over in Paris and everything. And they did some very interesting graphics around this story I'm about to tell you now. But when I was researching the book, a friend of mine called Nick Buchanan, who is the editor of an online fanzine called PKD Otaku, which is a fanzine about Philip K. Dick, and get hold of copies of it. It's really, really good. It's really excellent. And he was one of my readers, and he contacted me and everything else. And he had in his collection, he had all the Philip K. Dick letters. You know, there's bound letters of all Philip K. Dick's letters. There are in about 6 or 7 volumes of them. And as part of my research, he sent me the books. So I was reading through them. And while I was doing this, I, quite by chance, was online. And I found that somebody was selling original copies of letters that Philip K. Dick had sent this person. And the lady that was selling the letters, a lady called Gloria Krentz Bush, who was Phil's pen pal back in 1974.
Wow. Yes.
Okay. Now, I managed to get hold of a copy of this letter. And in this letter, it's typewritten by Phil to Claudia. I call Gloria, but it's Claudia. And in it, it's quite fascinating. And again, I will send you a copy. I'll send you a copy of it so you can post it on your wall or whatever. And it turns around, it's typewritten. And Phil is turning around and he's saying, he's doing general chatter. And then he suddenly breaks into his chatter and he said, I think I'm becoming precognitive. And then he said, last night, I had a series of intense hypnagogic dreams. I saw undersea cities. And then I saw one stark graphic image. A portly middle-aged man was lying on his stomach between a sofa and a coffee table. And then he writes in the corner, handwritten again, I think I'm becoming precognitive. Now, this was an extraordinary image, and it obviously concerned him, this image. Roll forward to March 1981. 1981. And Phil and Tessa had split up or were living apart. And Phil was living in LA. And he was a member of a book club with people like Tim Powers, the science fiction writer, who's a good friend of Phil's. And I checked this with Tim to confirm that this is what happened. Tim wrote a wonderful book, by the way, called The Anubis Gate, which is well worth checking out. He's a very talented writer in his own right. But Phil didn't turn up one evening for the book club. So the next day, the members of the group went round to Phil's apartment and they couldn't get in. They were knocking on the door and they couldn't get in. So they had to break the door down. And they broke in to find Phil lying face down on his stomach between a settee or a sofa and a coffee table. He technically never regained consciousness, and I think that was the Wednesday, and he died on either the Saturday or the Sunday. Now, what I find intriguing about this was the imagery. He was seeing himself from an out-of-body state, looking down at his own dead body, but didn't necessarily recognize, or his dying body. Now, according to my hypothesis, which we won't have a chance to talk about, but if you check it out, it's called Cheating the Ferryman. I argue that we're all dying. We're all living in a recreation of our lives, a super-duper VR equivalent of our lives, which I do the science of in a number of my books. And I argue that this is what happened with Phil, is that he was able to access elements of his own future. And he was seeing it from an out-of-body state. But the problem would have been, if Phil had never regained consciousness, his consciousness would never have been aware of seeing his body dead, if I'm making sense. You know, if he died with a stroke, or his stroke had destroyed his brain, it meant he wouldn't have been able to see that, nor have it confirmed. I checked with Tessa to discover, because I said to Tessa, did Phil ever come to? And she said, yes, he was conscious. Right up into the end, his eyes were flickering and he was reacting before he died. So to me, this is then evidence that Phil was seeing elements of his own future. So quite literally, when I call the book The Man Who Remembered the Future, it's because he did. And that was one classic element which was irrefutable. You can't argue with this in any shape or form. He saw his own death.
I have a question, Anthony, on all your hours and hours and pages of research on PKD. I don't know, and this is my personal opinion, if I would call Philip an occultist, but it's interesting because I do believe he had contact with Jung, if I'm correct on that. There were some talks there, and Jung is one of those guys that, to me, was able to unlock something within himself through the use of writing, through the use of literature, and a perfect example is the Red Book. Do you perhaps think that maybe PKD was using literature as some sort of divinatory device? Because, again, we're talking about having downloads. And when you listen to the talks of Philip K. Dick, he seems like a really genuine, nice guy, not a guy that was too woo-woo. He'll tell you like straight up, like, hey, listen, I heard this voice when I wrote Valis. After I wrote it, the Divine Invasion, I stopped hearing it again. And I could only hear, he was real. It wasn't like one of these guys that was living in a sci-fi. He was, I believe he was skeptical of what he was even hearing. Do you think that maybe his writing through the use of all these characters, which we know an important part of his work was taking, and I've heard him say it, taking real people, deconstructing them, and then morphing them with a fictionalized, character that he would make. And he says that was very important in his work. Do you think that writing had anything to do with the experiences he was having?
Most definitely. If you take the time to read the exegesis, which was Phil's manuscript documents, his jotting and his notes, it is extraordinary. Now, the problem with the exegesis is it's linear in time, but it's not linear in ideas. So it bounces here, there, and everywhere because Phil was such an eclectic mind.
Yeah.
He excited, and there's whole sections on Jung and the Red Book. He absolutely adored the Red Book, the elements of the Red Book. He also believed he was a starseed. He believed that he had possibly been abducted when he was younger. If you're very interested in this angle, there's who was it now? There's somebody else that Brad Steiger, who is the late Brad Steiger writer. And Brad and Phil never actually met, but they used to discuss a lot of things. And Phil concluded that he had entity encounters in some way or another. But also, as in my book, The Daemon, A Guide to Your Extraordinary Secret Self, I have elements of the creativity within writers. And this is what drew me to Phil, was because he would explain the genesis of his plots and the genesis of how he created his characters. And time again, he would be in a set of circumstances whereby he would find himself living an event that he'd written about in a previous book. Now, I think it's Cry My Tears, the Policeman Says. I think it is.
Flow My Tears.
Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. In that, there is a sequence where the character, I can't remember the character's name now because it's quite a time ago when I was doing my research, but the character goes to an all-night gas station to buy some gas and also to buy a newspaper or something. And clearly when Phil was writing the book, as we know when we write fiction, it just flows out of you. You see the imagery and you just write it. And this is what Phil did. And he wrote it very, very descriptively. And he describes how the guy goes to the garage. And when he's there, he hears a rustling in the trees near the garage. And this black guy comes out and he asks for money. Says he's in desperate trouble. Can you give me some money, please? And the central character thinks, is this a mugging or anything else? And he thinks, no, I'll give him money. And he gives him the money. And later on, the guy sends the money back. So this was a trope that Phil wrote. Now, 6 or 7 years later, he finds himself, can't sleep. He decides to go out to the local garage, drives his car out there to get some petrol and buy a newspaper. And as he drives up, he goes, my God, this is the sequence from my book. He said, all I need now is the black guy to come out through the bushes and ask for money. And that's what happened. Now, he then describes other incidents. There's also in that book, I think there is a young girl who is having an affair with a police officer. And the police officer doesn't know. There's some kind of complexity there. Phil writes this in the book, and then many years later, he meets the young girl herself and the police officer. And again, he said, this is most peculiar. And this is, again, when he got this idea of the way in which information is back-fed through time to creative people that helps them create their plots. Now, in a lot of my writing, I've discussed it's not just Philip K. Dick. There are numerous other writers that have had this effect. Now, if my concept of cheating the ferryman, and my concept, which I call the Damon Eidolon dyad, is correct, we are all two personalities. There's the Eidolon, which is the one life ego consciousness that lives our life in a linear fashion. But there's another part of us, which again is going back to the Julian Jeans concept of the bicameral mind, which Phil was fascinated with, by the way, as well, which is incredibly intriguing. So a lot of his work, I think a lot of the stuff in Valis was very much to do with the bicameral mind, the way he plays with the idea of the character of Horselover Fat and Philip K. Dick. And as you know, Horselover Fat is a pun. Horse lover is Phil Hippus, and fat in German is Dick. So Horselover Fat is Philip Dick. And there's the central character who's writing the book, who's the science fiction author called Philip Dick. And of course, they relate to each other in different ways. But the idea is the daemon is almost like your game player. You're living a virtual reality version of your life. It's a virtual reality. It's three-dimensional. And you live it linearly because you're in Eidolon. But your daemon is your game player. And your daemon has played your game many times. And it's traveled and it's followed your different paths of your life. In many ways, again, one of Philip K. Dick's favorite authors was a guy called Jorge Borges, who is was an Argentinian writer. And Jorge Borges wrote a very famous story called The Garden of the Forking Paths. And in this, he describes how we all exist, literally following different routes through our lives. And all of those routes exist, and we literally, to use a technical term, we collapse the wave function of that particular reality by our act of observation. And that reality collapses to allow us to continue through. And when we go through, we are guided by the voice. That voice in your head that says you should do this or you shouldn't do that. That's your daemon. That's the immortal you. That is the real you. You as an Eidolon, you have no real concept of future or the past, the future and everything else, unless, as I argue, that you are what I call the Huxleyan spectrum. Do you remember Aldous Huxley in 1954 wrote a book called Opening the Doors of Perception? Again, Philip K. Dick references this regularly in the exegesis. And I think in one or two of his novels, he references as well. So all these channels are all the same feed, the place we are all intellectually eating from is the same sources. So the idea is that, that we, in some way, part of us can see our own future. And that element is what guides us. And this is what, again, once I get started, I don't stop. I'm sorry about this. But what is also important is to realize that in his book, Ubik, if you remember, there is a reality that is being manipulated from somewhere else. The characters find that things are happening within their reality, suggesting that somebody is manipulating their reality in some way. And the people that are manipulating the reality are a group of characters in the novel who have already died, who are existing in what Philip K. Dick called half-life. And this is where I find it incredibly freaky. Okay, so Philip K. Dick comes up with this idea of half-life. And it's the idea that when you die, you go into this kind of alternate reality that abuts ours. And in many ways, you can influence this reality by being in this half-life. Now, this is exactly my cheating the ferryman hypothesis. So quite by chance, using different sources, I did the science of what Phil was putting forward in his book. Phil, he was just extraordinary. I wish I'd met him, because it was almost as if we were thinking about the same things, to such an extraordinary extent. It's amazing.
It is amazing. And this idea of, the collective consciousness, right? Like just tapping into the memory palace, of tapping into these different thoughts that great minds that are destined to help draw things back down into the collective yet again, almost as if Phil went into that half-life himself, allowing this information to be revealed to specific people who were going to write it all along. You were predicted, right? Like the story has happened to you, and it's quite fascinating. And it's almost, would you consider yourself, have you ever had, okay, let me ask you this. So, it's funny that in the prologue of your book, the Daemon book, that you say specifically, like in one section, you say, you were meant to have this book. You picked it up for a specific reason, right? Like you did this. And I was like, yeah, awesome. I'm sure I did. You have a lot of other books, and I didn't pick up any other book besides that book. And when I started reading and realized that the last and final chapter of that book was dedicated to Philip K. Dick, now the two books I have from you are, solely related in that topic. And then it starts to go into this dyad philosophy of the Daemon and the Eidolon, which is fascinating beyond repair. It's esoteric and occult in the sense of talking about the two pillars of the brain, this ancient Vedic philosophy, the Kundalini aspects. It's an ancient mystery. It is the deepest mystery of the human situation that we are involved in. And so, but I was wondering, we're talking about PKD having all these precognitive situations, so on and so forth. But you talk about an event that happened to you in the year 2000, and I had yet to find out what that was. And I was wondering if you would tell us what that event was.
This is extraordinary. Before I mention this, also mention to have people coming across my books, and there's one particular event that it blows my mind, but there's so many of these events that have happened, and people who know me know that these things happen to all of us. They're just extraordinary. And there's one lady who is quite a famous medium, British medium, and she was down in London a few years ago because she was going to be interviewed on the BBC. And she was staying in a hotel, and she leaves the hotel and she gets on the tube stage. She gets on the tube and she's traveling to the tube to the BBC studios. As she's traveling on the tube, there's a woman sitting opposite her. And this woman is looking at her quite strangely. And you know the way when somebody's looking on the subway or something, you think, God, this is a bit weird, but what can I do about it? And the woman stands up to get off the train, get off the tube, and she was carrying a bag. And as she did so, she tipped her bag and a book fell out and landed at the feet of the lady that communicated with me, the medium. She picks up the book and tries to hand it back to the woman. And the woman said, no, that is for you. You must read it. And got off the tube, leaving this woman standing there looking at this book going. And it was my first book, Is There Life After Death? And she said, when she messaged me, she said, I don't tend to read books that often. She said, and I started reading the first few lines and I went, oh my God, this is for me. So she closed the book. She got off the tube at the next station, went up and phoned the BBC and said, something has happened. There's a book I need to read. Can I come in tomorrow to do the interview? Which she did. And she read that book overnight. And she said it was the most extraordinary book she'd ever read, which was wonderful to hear. But that's the kind of thing that happened. But now let's go on about the event. Now, this is pure Philip K. Dick. This could be in a Philip K. Dick novel, but it really happened. And there are people who know about this. Way back in around about, and I've got to probably get the right years, around about 1990, 91. I love my music. I'm a huge music freak. I've got, 30,000 tracks on my MP3 player and things. So, I really love my music. And I have done, since the mid-1960s right through to the present day. I was in a record shop and I bought an album, I bought a CD, and the lady in the record shop said, I don't know if you're interested, but because the label you've bought the CD of, there's also for 49p, you can buy another CD, which is a sampler CD of other albums they're bringing out in the next few weeks. So you can have this for small amount of money. So I thought, yeah, okay, fine, I'll do that. So I take the CD and I go home. And I'm sitting at home that night with my ex-wife at the time, and she's in the kitchen cooking. Now, it's not because I'm sexist. She liked cooking, and I like listening to music. So it's not as I'm being sexist in any shape or form. So I start playing the CD with the sample tracks on it. The original album was by a lady called Mary Chapin Carpenter, if anybody's interested. And the album was Come On, Come On. But that's an aside issue. So I'm listening to the CD, and it gets to the third or fourth track. And it was like I'd been hit by a train. Another good band, by the way, A Train. They're a very good band. And I'm thinking to myself, I know this song. And it's a very happy song. And I checked it, and it's a song called Round of Blues by an American singer-songwriter called Sean Colvin. I called Jenny in from the kitchen, and I said, Jenny, can we go into our solicitors next weekend? I want to change my will. And she looked at me, as women always do, you bloody insane. And she looked at me and said, why? And I said, I just do. I want this song to be played at my funeral. So I want you to be aware that this is my song. So we went in, and even the solicitor said, you weird. Why do you want this song? And I said, I don't know. I wish I knew. Now, this is years before I started my writing career or anything. I was an executive at an airline at the time or something. I was working quite high level in business. So I'd never thought, I'd always wanted to write, but I'd never got round to doing it. So that was something that was never going to happen as far as I was concerned at that stage. Now, roll forward to around about 2004, winter 2003, 2004, maybe slightly earlier. Sadly, my relationship with Jenny ended, and I'm with my new partner, who's now my subsequent wife. And when myself and Penny and Jenny, I go for the same kind of names, the first thing I said to her was, when I die, at my funeral, I want this song played. And Penny, like Jenny, looked at me as I'm a complete madman, particularly because there's quite an age difference between the two of us, so she would be around when I died. Hopefully. So anyway, I said, this is the song. And I played it to her. And she said, but again, it's a happy song. Why do you want this played? And I said, I don't know, but I do. So then roll forward, 2004, I was working as a divisional human resources manager for a group of hospitals in the north of England. And part of my job was literally troubleshooting. So I'd go from one hospital to another, sort employee relations problems out and various things. It's a great job. And they gave me a beautiful, nice little sports car, and I was zipping around all over the place. And I was driving on a road called the M62, which if you look on a map of the UK, it's a road that runs from Yorkshire into Lancashire over what's called the Peak District. It's the highest point in England. And it's notorious for bad weather. It's notorious for snow and fog and everything. And I think it was late November, early December. And I was positioning to our Chester hospital. I was living in a place called Harrogate at the time and working out of Harrogate. So I'm coming over, and I have my music player on in the car. Now, as I said, I love my music. And at that time, I had around about 16,000 different MP3s. And I'd only ever have them on random play. So any one track, there was a 1 in 16,000 chance of that track coming up. So I'm driving along, I'm in the middle lane, and it's foggy and it's misty and there's traffic everywhere. And I'm zapping along, and suddenly this song, Round of Blues, comes on the soundtrack, blaring out. And immediately something inside of me, which I believe was my daemon, went, oh, Jesus, this is it. This is the moment. And I found my left hand grabbing the steering wheel and turning into the slow lane, suddenly into the slow lane. As I did so, there was a lorry in front of me, and it had a load of crash barriers on the back. As I turned, the crash barriers came off the back of the lorry and bounced in the middle of the road. They would have hit me.
Whoa.
I'd have been killed. There is no way I could have survived that. I now know why that was my death song. I now know why the earlier me associated that with my death. Because last time I lived, Last time I went through what I call the Bohmian IMAX, the simulation, that is the moment I died. Just like Philip K. Dick remembers when he died and he had these flashes of lying there, it was my Philip K. Dick experience of seeing my own death or hearing the circumstances of my own death. Now, what is fascinating here, I posted this a number of times, and I know that Sean Colvin knows about it. And indeed, do you know there's an American singer-songwriter called Suzanne Vega? You're probably too young to remember. She did Tom's Diner, various other songs.
Oh, okay, yeah.
She's a folk singer. She was quite famous for a time. She probably still is in various ways. But she copied one of my postings on this on Twitter, and she was really quite intrigued by it. So to me, that was, if ever I needed evidence that my cheating the ferryman hypothesis is correct, I know it is, personally. Now, it could be that because this is effectively my universe that I'm creating by collapsing my wave function, it probably is the right model of life after death in my universe, because this is my universe. Therefore, my theory or my hypothesis or my speculation should be correct. Whereas in your universes, they may not be correct because you're in different universes, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So who knows? Because there's this wheels within wheels. And that's one of literally dozens and dozens of examples. I'll give you one more. How are we doing on time? We okay for time?
41 minutes right now. We're 41 minutes in.
I'll give you one more example of just how powerful this is. Many, many years ago, again, before I'd written any books or was even begun to become a writer, I was staying on a tiny Greek island called Simi. And I'd been reading a book called The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. I'm a great fan of Richard Dawkins, by the way. And one thing I never do is dog-ear pages. It's something I do not do. I hate it. My books have to be pristine. So I reading this book, and I decide to go up for a drink. So I go up and go to the bar and have a drink and everything. And then I forget the fact. And I put the book in my bookcase when I get back and everything else as well. Roll forward again. I'm researching my first book. And the first book, there was a larger version of the first book that had the real hard science in it. And one of the sections in the book I was really interested in was mitochondria and mitochondrial DNA. You know, mitochondria carries through the female line. Mitochondrial DNA carries through the female line, and mitochondria is one of the subunits of all cells. So every cell in your body has a mitochondria in it, and every mitochondria has this other form of DNA that's different to your regular DNA inside it. And I was researching this, and I thought, you know, I need to know more about this. Now, if you ever see my bookcases, I've got scores of them. I've just got a library full of books. And I thought the only person I know that will have written about this will probably be Richard Dawkins. So I go to my collection of Richard Dawkins books, and I've got all of them. And I found, again, my left hand goes towards The Blind Watchmaker. And this is 10 years afterwards from the incident on the beach. I pull the book out, and as I look at the book, I see that there's one page dog-eared. And the voice in my head goes, "You're going to like this." I knew exactly what was going to be there. And I opened it, and I read down the page, and halfway down the page was Richard Dawkins talking about mitochondria. I then went to the back of the book, and it's the only time he mentions mitochondria. I then checked his other books. It's the only time he ever mentions mitochondria. My earlier self, my Damon, was going, I'm going to have a little joke with you here. I'm going to do something, and I'm going to leave you evidence that you're being guided to write this book. And I know you're going to write this book. I'm going to do something you never do, and I'm going to do it in such a way you're not going to realize you've done it. And I dog-eared the page, you know, put the page over. And my Damon obviously decided, I'll make sure you never see that again. Until you need to, until I give you a nice little message and I go, there's a synchronidity for you.
It's interesting because was it Socrates that talked about the daemon and communing with your daemon, right? So there's this idea that I've always thought about, like, where the Greeks were onto it because even Plato was the one that said, we know everything. We already know everything. We're just remembering everything, right?
Yeah, and remembering amnesis and anamnesis. And again, Philip K. Dick, if you actually read the exegesis, it has a whole section on amnesis and anamnesis. Amnesis is forgetting, because the argument is when we die, according to the pre-Socratics, when we die, and again in my book, this is why I call it Cheating the Ferryman, by the way, when you die, when you were a shade, when you found yourself on the banks of the Styx, Charon would come through the mists, wouldn't he? And you'd pay him the oboli to take you across to the land of the dead, to the land of the shades, to Hades. I argue we cheat the ferryman. We never pay him his money because we never get there. But what used to happen, the ancient Greeks believed that what would happen is you go across the river Styx, but also there was other rivers down there. The Acheron is another river, and another river called the Lethe, Lethe. And the ancient pre-Socratic Greeks believed that you were given a choice when you were in the land of the dead. You could stay there, or you could go back to live your life again. But to do that, you had to drink the waters of the Lethe, the river of forgetting. And by drinking the waters of the Lethe, all your past life memories would be washed clean. Then you'd go back across the Styx and live your life again. This is what I believe actually happens. The wisdom of the ancient Greeks and the pre-Socratics and the mystery schools, the Eleusinian mysteries, had so many truths in them. And you're quite right, Socrates said he had a daemon. I don't know if you know, but the daemon was with him all his life. He used to leave his friends and have conversations with his daemon. And the time the daemon deserted him was when he was on trial. Do you remember they tried him and he had to drink hemlock? Mm-hmm. That was the one time his daemon decided it wasn't going to manifest because it knew that it couldn't stop him dying. It knew that he had to die at that stage. In my book, The Daemon, I have so many examples of this. Joan of Arc is somebody else whose daemon was so imminent in her life. But again, we have, going back to Jung, in the Red Book, Jung talks about Philomen. Mm-hmm. And Philomen is his daemon. And he actually calls it his daemon. Rudyard Kipling, the British writer, his muse that narrated his stories for him, he called his daemon. The daemon is something that is incredibly powerful. It's something we all know instinctively. A lot of my writing, people come to my writing and they go, wow, I feel I've known this all my life. It's just I've never realized it. The power of my hypothesis, I can explain virtually every single occult occurrence, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, lucid dreaming. I can explain them all. My latest book I'm doing now, I'm writing an extensive book on the near-death experience. I can explain that. I can explain déjà vu. I can explain precognition. All these things, once you realize how it works, everything falls into place. And it's suddenly, and this is what happened when I did Contact in the Desert, because people had never heard of me. And, I turn up, this little English guy, and I turn up, nobody knew who the hell I was. After my first talk, it went round like wildfire. It was extraordinary. I was approached immediately afterwards by the new owners of the event because his daughter went to it. And she was saying that's the most extraordinary revelation I have ever come across in my life. She said it was like you were taking the things off my eyes and I was suddenly seeing really what reality is behind reality.
That hologram effect that you described that in the Daemon book, that the idea of it being when you cut or break a hologram, it's consistently there no matter how, same as a magnet and a hologram, both they remain the same. You don't get a piece of it, you get the whole, even when you segment a piece. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that's what you're describing, is that people are having that aha moment of realizing that everything is all encompassing at all times.
Well, this is very much, Michael Talbot wrote a book called The Holographic Universe many years ago, which was an amazing book. And I'd like to think I've taken Talbot's ideas one step further. I think I've taken a lot of people's ideas to the logical conclusions because I have a very eclectic mind. And if I read something, I don't tend to forget it, which means that I'm in the position when I come across a bit of new information, I'm able to immediately associate that with something I read 20 years ago and go, poof, that is so like Julian Jaynes and his bicameral theory, So I'm able to do that. And I have a strange gift, if that's the right term, to be able to do that. Like your hologram theory here. I mean, it's really extraordinary. This is very much applying the ideas of what I call David Bohm, Professor David Bohm, who was an American physicist who came to work in the UK after the McCarthy era because he was a communist and he was kicked out of America and things. But Bohm has something he calls the explicate and implicate orders. Now, this guy worked with Einstein. This guy is a serious quantum physicist. And he has the idea that everything's enfolded on itself holographically. And the universe is enfolded in itself. So, when William Blake said to see heaven in a wild flower and to hold the universe in the palm of your hand, this is what he was meaning. This is, again, the esoteric belief systems. This is esoteric beliefs. We know this from esoteric teaching over generations. We know this back to the Vedas. This is all stuff that is known by certain groups. And the idea, as you said, that if you take a holographic image and you smash it, it won't be like a jigsaw puzzle where there's a part of the full image. You will have a denuded version of the full image in every shattered piece, which is, again, what Bohm was talking about by enfoldment. And again, Philip K. Dick wrote about David Bohm. Again, in the exegesis, he references David Bohm. There's, a lot of the things I've been doing, Phil was already there, but what he wasn't doing was the science, because he didn't think scientifically. He was a great philosopher, but it was difficult for him to join. Whereas I'm interested in quantum mechanics, I'm interested in neurophysiology, I'm interested in neurochemistry. So I can make the links with neurochemistry, with out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, endogenous dimethyltryptamine, and the way that is released by the pineal gland at the point of death, these kind of things. So the areas, and this is why I think my writing is comparatively unknown, is because it's so all-encompassing. The academics aren't reading it because my books always tend to be in the New Age sections of books. But everything in my book is referenced. Every single thing I state is referenced back to academic papers. I do not expect my readers to take my word for it. I expect them to go away and read it themselves and then come back to me and say, what, you're talking a load of crap, or what you're saying makes sense to me. Nobody has ever come back to me to say it's a load of crap, by the way, ever. But there will be one day, somebody probably will, in which case they will have an interesting debate with me.
You're talking about how these ancient scriptures kind of sort of are hinting at this idea, right? And I'm wondering, in everything that you've said, where does God or the demiurge or Valis or Zebra fall into all of this? Is there something behind operating like the architect, or is everything just happening by chance and we're just all an accident and we're here because, again, we have the Bible, which states that God created everything, and then the 7 days of creation, et cetera, et cetera. Where does God fall into you can call him whatever you want.
Right. Okay. If you remember, I discussed the Eidolon and the daemon. So the Eidolon is a consciousness that lives its life one time. The daemon lives your life many, many times. But that's not where my hypothesis stops. And this, again, I can't do the science of this because I can't. I can do the science of the daemon because I can do the neurology. I can talk about split brain operations and various other things. But the next section is pure supposition on my part. But bear with me on this. That the daemon lives many lives, your lives. But above the daemon is something I call the uber daemon. And the uber daemon is my equivalent of Jung's collective unconscious. It is effectively the awareness and data fields of every human being that has ever existed and ever will exist. And that's where for instance, some people criticize my hypothesis that we live our lives over and over again as ourselves. When people say, well, people have had hypnotic regression, where they go back and they're somebody else, or people have claimed reincarnation. The reincarnation information field that has been taken in is because people during hypnotism are logging in effectively to the information fields of the uber daemon, Jung's collective unconscious. So therefore, it is not at all surprising that if you go into that state, you suddenly remember you were a medieval knight or you were a peasant in the reign of Louis XIV. This is because that information is readily there. And it's almost random what you pick up when you do that. But then I argue above that, there is something I jokingly call the Godaemon, God-Amon, okay? And the Godaemon is effectively what in the Kabbalah is known as the Or Ein Sof, what is known within the Vedanta as being Brahman. It's the consciousness that is everything. It is the matrix that contains all information. What we would consider to be God, for want of a better term. And that the true nature of reality is information. The physical universe we think is a physical universe, as you're probably aware, is 99.99999999996 empty space. And the solidity within that are basically quarks and electrons. And quarks and electrons are point particles, which mean they have no extension in space. If we then pull in the other part of reality, which is the electromagnetic spectrum, magnets, the actual bosons that carry the electromagnetic signal are things called photons, which are basically the particles of light, who can be a particle or a wave, depending upon who's looking at them, which again is a whole different ballgame. But the photons themselves can only travel at the speed of light. They can't travel any slower. And they have zero mass. Think about that for a second. It means that photons of light don't have any extension in space and only travel at the speed of light. There is no time at the speed of light. Time stops. So from the point of view of a photon that's left a quasar 3 billion, 4 billion years ago, that light that hits your eye, as far as the photon's concerned, it's exactly the same instant. This again is coming down to the fact that everything is a unity. Everything is enfolded within itself. Everything is part of everything else. In which case there is no out there. There is no in there. We get over the problem of Cartesian dualism by the simple argument that there is no dualism. Everything is singular. This concept is called pandeism. And I contributed a chapter. There's a guy called Knut J. Mapson, who wrote a book called Pandeism and Anthology a few years ago. And I will be contributing a chapter to his new book later on this year. So clearly, God is everything, which is exactly what the mystics have believed forever. God, look for God within. It's what the Gnostics argued. It's everywhere. The evidence for this is literally everywhere. It's in every belief system, from the Kashmiri Shaivists to the Bon tradition of esoteric Buddhism. Every belief system, when you start looking into the Gnostic beliefs of most major religions, i.e. the Gnostic, the hidden beliefs, the occult beliefs, literally hidden, you will find the same themes. Human duality, the daemon and the eidolon. What is the whole mystical tradition is to find the God within. I also have a concept which I call the egregorial. And this is again to do with UFOs, UFO entities. I argue that these are brain created, but they're not hallucinations. They have independence of us because they use us to draw themselves into this reality. And there are levels of reality. Levels of reality that I think occultists have talked about for centuries, but they've garbled it because they haven't got the scientific basis to put a model together. I argue it's all to do with black holes. It's all to do with how black holes are projecting information inwards. And it's all to do with what's called a holographic universe. The universe is holographic in nature. And everything within the universe is created by two things: information, data, and the thing that processes the information and data. The data is the background of everything, and the processor is the human brain. And the human brain, or consciousness, wherever that is located, which is another matter, is what brings about a projection of the internal reality externally. And I'll make a final point here. If you read any books on what's called consciousness studies, serious academic books, according to serious researchers, neurologists and everything else, the people who believe that what is out there is it is and how we see it, are called naive realists. Because science tells us that whatever is out there is not what we see. We know this. We only see such a tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's vanity. I call it electromagnetic chauvinism. The idea that because we see things in a particular way, that's how everybody sees them. Nonsense. A guy called, I think it was Searle, wrote an academic paper many years ago called What It's Like to Be a Bat. And he puts forward the idea, imagine being a bat. You see sound. And of course, in my books, I write about people who suffer from synesthesia. These are all linked. Synesthesia, temporal lobe epilepsy, migraine, schizophrenia. They're all on my Huxleyan spectrum. So finally, it means that however long you're along that Huxleyan spectrum is how wide open your doors of perception are and how you perceive the Bohmian IMAX. You can see now why I called it the Bohmian IMAX. David Bohm. Why do I call it the Bohmian IMAX? It's a smashback to a philosopher called Daniel Dennett, who arrogantly wrote a book called Consciousness Explained many years ago. And in this, he presented a concept he called the Cartesian theatre. I argue that reality is not a Cartesian theatre. It's a Bohmian IMAX, and it's completely different. We have got everything wrong. Our science is telling us, the science is pointing at the conclusions I've come to. And the scientists are going off on tangents. It's because the neurologists are not talking to the quantum physicists, the cosmologists are not talking to the biologists are not talking to the anthropologists, because they're all in silos. And only an independent thinker like myself, with my kind of weird mind.
And they're not talking to themselves.
No. They contradict each other all the time.
It's a circle jerk, that's why.
There's what?
It's a circle jerk, that's why.
Yeah, I like that image. Yeah, that's quite a good one. Yeah, it's like that film, is it The Human Centipede?
Yeah.
But it is. They're all looking after each other, and nobody is willing to break through. I do talks regularly, and I do events with scientists. I do debates with scientists. They always think they're going to win until they start debating with me, and then they change their mind, which is quite extraordinary. When we go out for a drink afterwards, I'll get chatting to the scientists and I'll just wait. And we always get the same thing. We'll have a couple of beers and I wait for the moment where one of them say, you know, what you write is complete nonsense. But there was one thing that happened to me I've never been able to explain. And I wait for it. And then I say, so why don't you talk about that? Why don't you talk about that in your lectures? And they always say the same thing when they've had a few beers and they're being honest. Academic tenure. To be seen, to be even looking into these things is to be ostracized. We have what's called scientism. It's not science, it's scientism. You know, the word empirical science. The word empirical comes from experience. You know, they've got it wrong. I'm not being vain here, because there's a group of young academics that are coming up now that are thinking differently, totally differently. The old school are dying off, and the new science, the new paradigm is on its way in. And by God, it's going to be exciting when this starts up, once the world can survive that long.
Yeah, I thought the Cartesian theater proved itself as a fallacy if you really start to, because there is no homunculi ad infinitum. There's just no way. So
no, exactly. This is the major issue. You know, that you end up with an infinite regress, and of course, the infinite regress is mathematically possible, but it doesn't make any sense. It's like I'm a great exponent of the Everett's many worlds interpretation, but I mix that in with the Copenhagen interpretation and other interpretations of quantum mechanics. And I think that the reality is mixed in with all of these things. And, you know, the idea that there's a little homunculus in our head that has a pair of eyes and a pair of ears, and inside his head is another little being that's doing that, obviously makes no sense. Information, we are picking up information in a completely different way to the way we discover. One of the things in my new book I'm going to be talking about, which is going to cause a lot of interest, believe me, is I'm arguing that the brain doesn't work neurologically. It works glially. You know, the way people say that you only use 10% of our brain. This is because the neurons within the brain are only 1/10 of the cells in the brain. 9/10 of the brain cells are things called glial cells. And glial is is Greek for glue, because that's all they think the glial cells were for. They've now found out that glial cells can communicate, and they communicate using something called a calcium wave. They can communicate very effectively, and there's an argument to say they can communicate non-locally, which will get over the major problem that neurological science has had, called the binding problem, as to how it is different parts of the brain that are located at different parts of the brain who need to communicate electrically via the neurons and via the neurochemicals, how we have a feeling of simultaneity. We shouldn't be able to even see a bouncing red ball because the bounce is being processed in one part of the brain, the color red is being processed somewhere else. We shouldn't be able to see that. And any scientist that's showing off, just say that to them. There are two things they don't like: the binding problem and wave particle duality. Either of them cause them to go into...
You touch on that in the Damon book, the concept of things not, that the chemical process that they claim happens in the brain and in the body, that things actually happen instantaneously and sometimes before, like the lifting experiment or like a football kicker in American football kicking a field goal. It's his whole setup and process to put the ball up in the air and aim for the goalposts happens instantaneously and too fast for it to be a series of chain reactions.
Yeah, it's called the intention to flex. It was first discovered by a guy called Benjamin Libet, where they did a series of experiments, and they discovered that the brain has already made a decision to flex your arm or flex a muscle before you've consciously made the decision. And again, there was a fascinating TV program on the UK, a science program many years ago, about 10 years ago now. And it used to be on YouTube, but it's not there anymore, which I find fascinating. There's a guy called Marcus de Satoy, who is a British mathematician. And he goes to see, this is how my brain works, by the way, and he goes to see a guy called Dylan Haynes. And Dylan Haynes is a researcher on this intention to flex thing. And Dylan Haynes showed Marcus de Satoy graphically and through the science of how, when they rigged him up and asked him to make a particular decision to do a particular thing, they showed him that the brain had already made the decision. And he turned around, you see de Satoy walk outside, and he's sitting outside the institute in Germany. And he said, I cannot believe what I've just discovered. Where's free will gone here? And it's because we're getting it wrong. Again, these experiments have been proven for years. There's something called the 5 phenomenon, which proves that we could be precognitive, that we can monitor the immediate part of our future, which nicely segues back to Philip K. Dick, because, of course, in Minority Report, that's exactly what the precogs do. And again, I do the science of this, how we can be immediately aware of the next second or so, second and a half. And I've witnessed this with somebody who suffers from temporal lobe epilepsy. When they were in an absence seizure, they predicted something which I then saw happen immediately afterwards. I saw that. I know that precognition is real. And if precognition is real, it means that time is not linear, or it means we have an informational field that science doesn't fully understand.
Trust the seance, definitely. I think it's all, what is it, technology that's beyond comprehension is a form of magic. I think it all goes back to these ancient alchemists and the idea that Philip K. Dick talks about, where these alchemists were at the precipice of forcing human evolution right over. And that's what the Gnostics were onto, and that's what all these mystery schools were onto. And that's why usually history has a tendency of repeating itself, where all those people are usually wiped out, and they're wiped out for a reason, because they're speaking the gnosis, and this doesn't go well.
Been warned. Many people have warned me and said, you're getting dangerously close here, matey boy. You're joining dots that other people don't want you to join. We shall see. But so far I'm okay, except that there are problems with my own podcast and things, which I can't make work anymore, but that's by the by. I've got the opportunity to speak to people like you.
Anthony, where can people find your work? Do you have a website that you can share with the listeners?
I do. It's anthonypeake.com. That's Anthony with an H and Peake.com. I also, you can find my books anywhere. You don't have to buy the books off the website. You can go to your local library. In fact, recently somebody was interested in my work and they found one of my books in a library in the Gold Coast in Queensland in Australia. So just go to your local library and order it. I don't mind where you get the information from. If you want the books, they're available on Amazon from bookshops. Most of my books are also in Audible. So if you want to listen to me reading them, you can do so. I had to audition to read my own books. Really good. So apparently I have the correct.
That's great that you're reading on that. Makes me look forward to getting. I was going to spend my credit this month on the Philip K. Dick book. So I look forward to hearing more of your voice, Anthony.
The Philip K. Dick book is one of the books that is not me reading it.
Oh, that's okay, though. That's okay.
Yeah, they decided quite rightly they needed somebody with an American accent to read it, and I think that worked quite well. Yes, I'm also very active on Instagram, extremely active on Facebook. So just look up Anthony Peake on Facebook and you'll find me. I have altogether around about 10,000 followers and friends on there. I also have my own YouTube channel, which you'll just find by going into YouTube and putting in Anthony Peake. I've got about 10,000 people following me there and involved in that as well. I posted something on there this morning, by the way, which is an update of all the things I'll be doing in the next few months. I mentioned you guys, by the way, in this interview there. And I'm generally, as I said in my thing today, I do read every email that's sent to me, and I do, but because I don't have a secretary, I don't have any support, it's just me, it's almost impossible for me to respond to all of them. I get 30 or 40 emails a day. I just couldn't humanly do it. And I'm on deadline for my new book, which has to be submitted at the end of March as well. So
glad we were able to cross the threshold with you then, sir.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable. Very, very good questions, very good comments. Obviously, you guys really do know your stuff, and it helps so much for me when people get it and they make the references and they make the links, because then we can bounce off each other and bounce into much more interesting areas of esoteric beliefs. So thank you very much. I'm honored to be on your show.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yeah,
for
we
your time.
were really excited to have this, and I'd say this is thanks for your time. And I think this is a great start to the adventure we're joining in together. This is our inaugural Philip K. Dick focused conglomeration, and I don't think there's any better way to get us out the gate than to talk to Mr. Anthony Peake. So we love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. And so if you can forward Roman your link so we can include them in the description. I encourage everybody to check out all your social medias, your YouTube and everything. So thank you again for this. And this is very interesting. We'll have to do it again very soon.
Absolutely. Look forward to it. Okay, guys.
Bye-bye, Anthony.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Anthony Peake reveals his Godaemon live to the RhipidonSociety.com.
You showed us his Godaemon. So predicting your death. What he called it, Bohmian IMAX? Is that a
Yeah, and that's in that Daemon book. I think you'll enjoy that Daemon book. I made it to about 2.5 chapters in, and it's just heavy laden with the stuff that we're already doing. And it is, at least at the beginning, hyper focused on that. The idea that there's a stereoscopic soul, that there's two of us. You got your over
stereoscopic soul. That's a good one. Stereo.
Now that's just my words. That's because it came to me while I was reading the book, like stereo vision, stereo hearing, and then we've got a stereo consciousness going on, because in the book, one, it talks about how they're doing experiments cutting the divider between the corpus callosum. I'm trying to remember the name of the dividing line between the two hemispheres of the brain. Evidence of it being two entities. That human consciousness is actually two entities. You have the right brain entity.
We're recording again, because I stopped recording, then I recall. I was like, this is all good. So
I can go back. So in the Anthony Peake's Daemon book, he starts dealing with the idea of what I was calling the stereoscopic soul. So you got stereo vision, stereo hearing, but then they start talking about experiments where they're doing experiments on people who are suffering seizure disorders, and other science experiments where they cut down the middle of the two sides of the brain. Corpus callosum, I think, is what they call that kind of weaving together section that connects the two sides of the brain. And when they cut it apart, they get evidence of two entities existing at the same time. And so the right-hand side is controlled by an entity that's the higher mind or the higher spirit. Maybe that's what we call our guardian angel or our daemon or whatever. And then the left-hand side is the part that we're experiencing, the linear, I'm conscious, I'm existing in the 3D world part. But there's a lot of information in there about how when they do that and they take the scalpel and cut those parts in half, and then they start doing experiments that they can get the higher mind, the daemon, to communicate either through using Scrabble letters or by hand gestures. And there's a few examples where people are they have a breakthrough moment where the right-hand side of the brain is making communication, and it has kind of this I'm the boss, I'm in charge, even humorous attitude about it. But then it'll go back like I think it was somebody under anesthesia or surgery or something, and the daemon comes out and he's kind of rooster tailing it. And then, he actually waved. Yeah, he kind of waved because he can't talk or whatever. But then he waved. He's like, well, I could see the anesthesia's wearing off. I got to get back out of here and let Dickhead take the wheel. So bye or whatever. So, yeah, it's in that book, the Daemon book. I definitely intend to finish that. And I would say Romie sending it definitely increased that. What did Anthony Peake called it? The synchronidity. Like, okay, some other person sent me this book. I'm trying to read it on 1.5 speed in the audio. Hurry up, because I got to do this first thing tomorrow morning. I got to set my alarm and get up. And it's like, it's just coming at me like blam, 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 like full serendipity and synchronicity. And it's like, and he's talking about his own experiences with the exact same thing. So then it makes it meta. Nice, bro. Nice. Got fireworks on the show.
What was that, bro?
This show's literally fire.
At me.
That was beautiful.
It's spitting at you,
dude.
bro.
Are we setting fireworks?
I'm glad you tapped into it, SB, because we know Juan was a little too invested into his family.
It was my wife's birthday this weekend, bro. So I was
okay.
tied up.
No, it was
just so you guys know. It was hard for me to get here and keep the spot because we got a geriatric pug and he's having like stroke or some kind of symptoms, and it might be the beginning of the end for him. I hope not, but he's having a hard time ambulating, so I almost canceled because this morning he woke up in a really hard way. But we think he's either way, it's gonna be okay, because you have to exist in this world until you don't, and either he's gonna recover or we're gonna let him go, and it'll be a heartbreaker because he's our homie. He's 17 years old, the pug.
Sorry to hear about that, bro.
Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, but I was like, I double checked with the lady, like, you sure? Like, let's do this, and I'm excited to start this adventure together. So
poor puggy bug.
Well, good thing is if you clone that
pug, didn't blow up. That's disappointing. It didn't explode.
If you clone that pug, will he re-inhabit that same body, or because we're talking about consciousness. I didn't get to ask him if he believes consciousness is local or not, but
I don't think he does.
I don't think he does either.
It's more like speculation from the books.
Like a collective type of thing. Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. There's definitely a lot more to talk about with him, because he's real deep into and these are concepts that's why I have such a hard time with people who are strictly only believe in one thing and that's it. It's like, no, there are, even if, let's say that you're the most strict atheist that there is, and there's nothing that can shake you, and you're an atheist, and you believe in nothing. That we're just an accident, right? That we're in a galaxy, in a universe, whatever, all that stuff. But there are aspects to reality that are unexplained, that are they're phenomena, right? We can't explain them. And what he was touching on, like, why do people talk about their life flashing before their eyes when they have a near-death experience? Like, what is that? What is the voices that we sometimes hear in our head? Like, I've always wondered what makes God speaking to you different than that one thing that pulled his wheel to the side. Like, it went into overdrive and just like pulled the wheel. What's the difference?
And in the book one that happens, he describes how that happens to a race car driver who avoids a big wreck and wins the race. So I thought it was fascinating that in the book he describes, and that guy had an epiphanic experience, like, what the hell happened? Because he would have crashed and maybe even died, because it's like an F1 race. But then not only did he survive, but he went on to win the race. And so then he malingered on it afterwards, trying to understand what caused his left hand to pull the wheel. And so to me, Anthony describing the same thing happening to him was a trip.
It's like all these Final Destination movies that we grew up watching, where it's like you're destined to go because you're next in line. Almost like it's like some sort of intelligent thing where, and we've been presented with the personification of death as well, the Grim Reaper, right? Where he goes around searching for people, right, that are next.
Kronos.
I mean, we've seen this over and over again. I think that's part of the collective as well, that the egregorial entities that he was talking about, where it manifests and becomes a thing. So
you should get your reptilian a scythe for behind you on your right hand side there. That would look good.
I think we should do like another deeper dive into these enigmatic rivers at some point, because
Absolutely.
I like that
Exploring
point where we exploring these different rivers and mythologies, because that mercurial water that exists, that you're floating through, that you're meeting, Anubis or Chiron or whoever it is that is traveling you forth, giving you these different options, these different forks in the river to say, you know what, you can drink this water of forgetfulness and travel back into the plane, or you can come with me into the other side and continue down this soul's endeavor. And that's so intriguing, right? Like, it's so intriguing to be given that option. It's so intriguing. Well, it's like, I was so close. Like, just let me go back just for a little bit. I will find a way to remember. I will make it happen. I will make it work. I'm eternal. I can for sure make this happen. But instead, you have such a hard time, in this Gnostic realm, to remember everything after you drink from that river.
And you're trying to learn from that water, everything as well after you're done, because that's the Faustian everything. Complex.
And so, it's so, like, I think these deep concepts, come from deep cut cosmic rivers. And it's so crazy, man, because it's just like, I wish I could. I mean, it's not even I wish, I should be trying harder and harder, because I know that I want to, like, live this life of synchrodipity. And, maybe I am, maybe I'm being too hard on myself, but, it's like, the more you align your life with these true, and like the true path that you're supposed to be on, the one that your daemon is constantly probably screaming at you, and you're so strong, and your left side that is just silencing it, and it comes through in these murmurs, in these just slight whispers, and you might listen to it, or you might just call it off because you're not making enough money that day. You need to just work harder, so then you can get to whatever it is that you think that you need to go to. But that's only one side of you. That's only one fucking half of you. And so igniting this other half and aligning this other half and becoming in true balance is so fucking important. And even me, like, as I teach the yoga practice, right? I was trained in it. I teach it. I do it. But do I even do it? Do I even really do it? And this is a complex that I have within myself. And so reading the book, The Daemon, and reading more of Anthony's work and talking about this with you boys is just, it's one of these things that just allows me to have the sense of, like, I am on this right path. Even if, when I leave this conversation, I go back out, will I think that I'm on the right path again? I don't fucking know. But I'm rambling. I'm fucking rambling. It's like 6 a.m. here. I woke up gosh dang early out here to get on this chat.
We did. We pulled it off. There were challenges. There were opportunities, temptations to abandon the initial project. And instead, here we are in the afterglow of a wonderful conversation with Anthony Peake. And it does mention that in the book too, Romie, how he's talking about how the Daemon does have this plan. And I forgot what the other word he uses for the regular self, for the lower self.
Eidolon.
The Eidolon always has this self-doubt and this pragmatism, and of course I struggle with that too. Like, should I go hard in the paint and try to hit up every gallery and start trying to put my art out there and making huge prints? Or should I just say, screw it, get off the internet, quit talking to all these fools and get a regular job somewhere go get hired on at the VA or something and become a janitor and just call it good,
Right? Yeah. Fuck that, though.
But I've done that. I'm older, so I've done that, and it doesn't really work for me. So, like, I'm at a catch-22. Like, well, I could do that, and if I grip my teeth, I might be able to pull it off for 18 or 24 months, and then I'm going to firebomb the whole project and probably be homeless on the streets or something.
Maybe. But look at Anthony Peake. Like, he's a good example. He quit his professional life to do writing, and he's just now doing Contact at the Desert, which is a big event. Big. It is a big UFO event. It's big. And so it's like, how many books did he have to write? How many years did he have to go and travel and traverse this plane in order to get invited to this big event? I mean, the timing, it's just like, and I think that's what gets really tough is like, you'd be like, I fucking did that. I did it. It didn't pay off for me as well. That's that other side taking back over. It's like, yeah, you did it, but you didn't. Like you were almost there, motherfucker. So now you got to get back into it, and I got to show you another sign, another path to tell you that you are here and ready for it. So SB, if I have any sway on anything in your life, brother, I promote you to just do anything creative, anything artsy, anything that is deep within you. And I already know you do that, man. But like, just fucking get out there and get in the galleries and do it. All right. And if you don't, I'm gonna come for you. I'm gonna come for you so bad. Hard. Okay.
And that's a legit threat because I know Romie's coming across the ocean pretty soon. So now I'm scared.
Very real. And like seriously,
throw one of those yoga holds on me. I'm gonna get downward dogged.
I'm gonna get you.
It sounds kind of gay. So you guys can do the downward dog.
Yoga is super gay, bro, but it's so good and fun and wonderful. It makes you feel so good that you forget how gay you look.
That's
so
right.
Remember,
actually, that's true.
And it's beautiful you guys are talking about this because remember, the Rhipidon Society is a collective devoted to achieving the unmediated experience of God, right? Because
hallelujah,
the part of the Rhipidon are the ones that have been penetrated by the pink light that is Valis and have been enlightened, have been projected to a higher being because of this. So yeah, we encourage everyone listening to go out, do something artistic, and express yourself. That sounds kind of cliche, but you get what we're saying, and maybe listen to that inner daemon, right? The Uber daemon, the God daemon, all these different things. And this is a really interesting conversation. We're gonna have this guy back on because there's a lot more to dig at. And
I think we'll be able to get him back because he seemed very comfortable and happy. I was glad that just a very few questions encouraged him to take the reins and fly because he didn't have a lot of time. So to me, that was very good.
Yeah, those are always the good guests, the ones that can really pack it down,
rattle it off.
And it was great. I really enjoyed this. So yeah, Romie, any closing thoughts? Anything else, boys, before we get out of here?
There was that song by Charlie Day, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Dayman, whoa, master of the night, man.
Yeah, we might need to get that song in there because that's the classic. To me, that's the highest level occult situation comedy ever hit. The battle of the Dayman and the Nightman. And the implication of one side, Juan, you're not aware of it? Oh my gosh, we're gonna blow your mind, bro.
Yeah, let's make a song for the show, and we can maybe make something around that.
Absolutely, we got songs lined up for this show, and I want to go check out the Round of Blues. If that's the song by Sean Colvin that Anthony Peake went immediately to his lawyer with his ex-wife and said, we're going to change up these legal paperworks because this needs to be what's playing when I'm laying there. The body's there, and I'm a corpse, and now I'm in the half-life space. Then I got to hear that. And I'm also, because he's a big music buff, my brother Adam Lohr, you guys, if you're Picture Show fans, you probably heard the song Particle Target a number of times. But as much as he talked about the double split experiment, I might have to send it to you, Romie, since you have the open connection. But I definitely want Anthony Peake to be able to hear the Particle Target song because it's hilarious and awesome and on point. So
awesome.
Nice.
Well, boys, let's we'll wrap up. Everyone's links are going to be in the description. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and this is going to be hopefully the first of many episodes where, we're going to try and focus on PKD, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about other stuff too, right? All along there because he is a gateway to a lot of other conversations. So, cheers to many more.
Tie the string theory back to PKD.
Awesome. All right, boys. Do the wave. Do the wave like the flamboyant, whatever it was that came out of that.
You know what they say? Elbow, elbow, wrist, wrist.
Bye-bye.
Bye.